Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil as they break down Black Mirror episodes one at a time, reflecting on the deeper ideas beneath the surface.
Welcome to a deep dive. Today we're looking at some material you shared about a really thought-provoking episode of Black Mirror, 15 Million Merits. But we're not just doing a recap. We want to use this episode as a kind of lens, to understand how things like authenticity, genuine feelings, even rebellion can get turned into products.
That's the plan. We'll unpack the key insights from the episode and the ideas around it, drawing from the material provided to really help you get a handle on this whole concept.
Yeah, and as we go, we'll bump into some pretty big questions, like how much does this fictional dystopia actually mirror our own world? And what does it really mean when everything, even dissent, can just be bought and sold? Let's dive in.
Yeah.
So to start, maybe paint a quick picture for us. What's the world of 15 million merits like?
Okay, so imagine people living in these tiny, identical rooms. The walls are basically huge screens, and their main job, their existence, is pedaling stationary bikes.
Just pedaling all day.
Pretty much. It generates power, sure, but the main thing is it earns them merits.
Ah, the currency. So merits are central.
Yeah, absolutely central. Merits are how you get everything. Digital content, food, ways to customize your online avatar, and, maybe crucially, how you pay to skip the ads.
Ads you can't normally avoid.
Right. They're constantly pushed on you, often pretty degrading ones, too.
Yeah.
Skipping them costs merits.
And there's a kind of class system, too, right?
Definitely. The cyclists are like the working middle class. Then you have this underclass, the lemons, they call them, who are overweight and basically exist to be mocked on the shows.
That's harsh.
It is. And at the top, you've got the performers, the media stars. The way out of cycling the dream is this talent show, Hotshot. But getting an audition costs a fortune, 15 million merits.
Okay, so the story follows one guy, Bing Manson.
Yeah, Bing. He's clearly ground down by it all. Then he meets Abby. She has this amazing singing voice, something that feels really real, authentic.
A rare thing in that world, I imagine.
Exactly. And Bing is so moved, he does something drastic. He gives her all his merits, everything he saved so she can try out for Hotshot. It's this gesture of, hope.
But the system has other plans for her audition, doesn't it?
That's where it gets really dark. Abby sings beautifully, but the judges, especially Judge Hope, they're not just looking at talent. They see her appeal, but they push her towards joining this pornographic channel, Wraith Babes.
Not what she or Bing intended.
Not at all. She's reluctant, but the pressure, the desperation, she accepts.
And that must just crush Bing.
Completely. He goes back to the bike, pedals like mad, earns another 15 million merits. He gets back on the Hotshot stage.
To do what? Sing?
No. This time, he pulls out a shard of glass, holds it to his neck, and just lets loose. This raw, furious rant against the whole fake system, the fake fodder, as he calls it.
Wow. So they shut him down, cut him off.
You'd think so, but that's the twist. The judges, especially Hope, they don't see a threat. They see content, valuable content.
Yeah.
His authentic rage is compelling TV.
So they offer him.
His own show, a weekly slot to just keep doing those rants.
Unbelievable. And the episode ends there.
Pretty much. We see Bing, now in a slightly nicer room, still surrounded by screens, delivering his angry speeches. His rebellion didn't break the system. The system just found a way to package and sell it. He's become part of the spectacle.
That summary alone is powerful. It makes you think this whole idea of taking something genuine, maybe even something resistant, and turning it into a product. That's not entirely unique to the show, is it? Where does this concept, commodification, come from?
Right. Commodification. It's the core idea. Basically, it's the process of taking things that weren't traditionally bought and sold, aspects of human life, culture, even ideas or feelings, and transforming them into market objects.
Like putting a price tag on things that shouldn't have one.
Exactly. Karl Marx talked about this early on with capitalism. He focused on how labor and the things people make become commodities, separating people from their own work. He was mostly looking at material goods back then, but the basic principle, it extends really well to intangible things like authenticity or dissent.
But how does something like a counterculture, something meant to push against the mainstream market, end up becoming part of it?
That's a really key question. Sociologists talk about things like diffusion. Rory Hanfler uses that term. It's basically watering down or depoliticizing radical ideas so they become safe, palatable for the mainstream. Businesses get very good at spotting resistance or alternative culture as a potential market.
Selling the style of rebellion, maybe.
Precisely. They can market the look or the feel, even if the original message gets lost.
Are there historical examples of this playing out?
Oh, absolutely. Think about the hippie movement in the 60s. Fundamentally anti-establishment, right? But the look, the clothes, the music, the peace signs eventually got mass-produced, commercialized, often stripped of the original political or spiritual weight. Or punk rock started as this raw DIY anti-consumer thing. But pretty quickly, the fashion industry, the music industry, they adopted the style. Ripped clothes, safety pins. Suddenly you could buy the punk look in stores, which, led to endless debates about selling out within the punk scene itself.
And hip-hop, too. It started with such strong social commentary.
A classic example. It grew out of specific communities, talking about real issues, injustice. But as it got bigger, corporations saw the potential. They started using the music, the fashion, the language, and ads for branding. Often they'd pick the marketable bits and kind of ignore or downplay the harder-hitting messages about struggle. That's diffusion in action, making it safe and profitable. You can even see it with aspects of queer culture. As LGBTQ plus people became a recognized market, businesses started using queer aesthetics in advertising. Which can bring visibility, sure, but critics often point out that it's a sanitized version, focusing on easily marketable aspects, sometimes ignoring the political struggles. Things like queer baiting, hinting at queerness for profit without real representation, fit this pattern too.
So there's this recurring theme. Something authentic or resistant emerges. The market notices, strips it down, makes it safe, and sells it back.
That's the pattern, yeah. The symbols get detached from the original meaning, the subversive edge gets dulled, it becomes just another product category. And, importantly, there's a big difference between, say, a band selling their own merch to survive and a huge corporation mass marketing a rebellious style. The power dynamics, the meaning, it all shifts depending on who's doing the commodifying.
Okay, that history really grounds it. 15 million merits is tapping into something real and recurring. Let's dig into the theory. How do thinkers help us understand the mechanics of that world?
Several critical theories are really useful here. The Frankfurt School, thinkers like Adorno and Horkheimer, they talked about the culture industry. Their argument was that under capitalism, mass culture isn't really art. It's produced like stuff in a factory.
Standardized for profit.
Exactly. Formulaic, predictable. And they argued its main function isn't really to enlighten, but to keep people passive. It creates what they called false needs, desires for endless entertainment, consumer goods, distractions to keep people busy earning and spending, not thinking about bigger things like freedom or changing the system. And you see that so clearly in the episode, right? The constant games, the shows, upgrading your avatar, these are the manufactured desires keeping people on the bike, spending their merits. It also leads to homogenization. Genuine creativity gets flattened. Abby turning into Wraith Abby is a perfect example. Her real talent is reshaped into a standardized, sexualized product.
That idea of everything being mediated, filtered through screens, reminds me of Guy Debord, The Society of the Spectacle.
Absolutely. Debord's work is crucial here. He argued that modern life under capitalism is dominated by the spectacle. It's not just about images, it's that our whole social reality, our relationships, are mediated through images. His famous line is something like, "Everything that was once directly lived has moved away into a representation."
So we end up watching life instead of living it.
Kind of, yeah. Appearances become dominant. Life becomes passive consumption of pre-packaged experiences, which leads to alienation. The characters in the episode are trapped entirely within the spectacle. Their world is the screens. Their work fuels the spectacle. And Debord talked about recuperation. That's the system's ability to take radical ideas or actions, co-opt them, commodify them, and feed them back into the mainstream, stripping them of their power.
Like what happens to Bing's rant.
Exactly. His genuine rage isn't suppressed. It's identified as valuable spectacle. Judge Hope essentially says, great performance, let's put it on weekly. His Dissent is recuperated, turned into just another show within the system. The spectacle absorbs its own critique and sells it.
And the audience is part of this.
Definitely. The spectacle relies on a passive audience consuming these representations. By watching, by cheering, like the audience in the show does for Abby and then for Bing, they become complicit. They reinforce the system.
If Debord said life recedes into representation, Baudrillard took that even further. Right? With the idea that reality itself starts to dissolve.
Jean Baudrillard, he pushes it into postmodern territory. He talks about hyper-reality, where the distinction between the real and the representation just collapses. He used the term simulacra, copies without originals, signs that don't point to any underlying reality anymore.
The simulation becomes the reality.
Or even more real than reality. The procession of simulacra, he called it. The simulation comes first and shapes our perception of the real. 15 million merits is drenched in this. The simulated nature views, the avatars, judging talent based on its potential as a digital product. It's hyperreal.
Like reality TV in our world.
A perfect example. It's presented as real, but it's heavily constructed, edited, simulated. Hotshot is exactly that. It's designed for ratings, for spectacle, not necessarily for pure talent. It's the simulation of authentic struggle or triumph that sells.
These theories are quite dense, but they really unlock that episode. What about the psychological impact? Living like that must take a toll.
Oh, definitely. The constant bombardment, the forced spectation, not being able to look away from ads that leads to desensitization. You're constantly exposed to things like the mocking of the lemons, and it can just numb your responses, normalize cruelty. It makes you think, maybe disturbingly, of something like A Clockwork Orange, the Ludovico technique, forcing someone to watch things against their will. It's a form of conditioning. The pressure in 15 million merits isn't physically violent in the same way, but that inability to escape the media stream feels psychologically coercive.
And the work itself, the cycling for merits.
That's coercive gamification, turning labor into a competitive game. It blurs work and life. While gamification isn't always bad, here it seems designed purely to enforce compliance, keep people in this state of monotonous activity, and don't forget the surveillance. They're watched constantly. Even looking away from an ad gets noticed. This total lack of privacy, of autonomy, it's incredibly alienating. People become data points, cogs in the machine. Very much echoes Marx's ideas about alienated labor. And being isolated in those pods just makes it worse. So yeah, these frameworks, the culture industry creating false needs, the spectacle mediating life and recuperating dissent, hyperreality blurring the lines that show how the system controls people, erodes real experience, and fosters this compliant, alienated state. It's a system that's learned how to simulate and sell the very authenticity people crave.
Thinking about art tackling these themes, was 15 million merits the first? You mentioned something earlier that explored this way back.
Yeah, the Film Network from 1976. It's uncanny how much it foreshadowed these ideas. Written by Patty Chapsky, directed by Sidney Lumet.
What's the story there?
It's about a news anchor, Howard Beale. He's getting old, his ratings are down, and the network tells him he's fired. So on his next live broadcast, he just snaps and announces he's going to kill himself on air next week.
Whoa, okay.
And predictably, the ratings go through the roof. So the network executives, instead of getting him help, they see opportunity, they lean into it. He becomes this mad prophet of the airwaves. His unhinged, angry rants become the main attraction.
So his genuine breakdown gets monetized.
Completely. That famous line, "I'm as mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore," it becomes a catchphrase, part of the show's brand, all managed by the network. His raw pain is packaged as entertainment, profit over everything.
The parallel with Judge Hope seeing Bing's rant as good TV is unavoidable.
It's almost identical thematically. Network was a scathing critique of news becoming entertainment way back in the 70s. Beale's show is like the birth of personality-driven, outrage-fueled media. There's that line where an executive tells him, "The world is a business, Mr. Beale."
Yeah.
Everything is reduced to market logic.
Which sounds exactly like the merit system, everything quantified, commercialized.
Exactly. Network was incredibly prophetic about media manipulation, how outrage itself could be commodified, and both stories show the same mechanism. The system absorbs dissent by turning it into a profitable product. Beale's anger becomes a format. Bing's rebellion becomes a show. And in both cases, the dissent loses its power to change anything. The audience just consumes the performance.
It really feels like a direct line, from network through to 15 million merits. Which brings us back to the present. How much is this stuff actually a mirror? How much of this is happening now?
Well, the uncomfortable answer is quite a lot. The episode resonates so strongly because we see these dynamics playing out all around us, especially with digital technology and market forces shaping more of our lives.
Reality TV seems like an obvious starting point.
Absolutely. Talent shows are a perfect example. They aren't just about talent, they're about crafting emotional narratives, stories of struggle, vulnerability, all produced and edited for maximum impact. It's that hyperreality Baudrillard talked about, a simulated version of experience, where the performance of emotion is the commodity. The golden buzzers, the dramatic pauses, the voting systems. It's all engineered to create these heightened, seemingly authentic moments. It's just like Hotshot prioritizing the marketable persona of Wraith Abi over just Abi singing. What's valued is often a performance of authenticity.
And influencer culture. Seems like a direct fit, too.
Perhaps the most direct. People literally turn their lives, or a curated version of their lives, into a brand, a product. This performative authenticity, crafting an online self. It's all about engagement, metrics. Likes, followers, brand deals become the measure of success, even self-worth. It's eerily similar to customizing your avatar and chasing merits in the show. And we know there's a psychological cost, the pressure, the comparison, the anxiety echoing bings of despair.
Then there's corporations getting involved in social issues.
Right, woke washing. When companies align with causes like BLM or LGBTQ plus rights, mainly for brand image, without necessarily changing their own practices, they use the language, the symbols, basically commodifying social justice concerns to appeal to consumers. It's related to what happened with Bing, isn't it? You could almost call his situation rage washing. The system gives his anger a platform, seems to embrace it, but only to contain it, turn it into harmless entertainment. It's like corporations using activist slogans while continuing business as usual.
The work system of the show, the cycling.
Yeah.
Is that
Strongly, I think, to the gig economy. The gamification leaderboards, constant pressure. Earning merits feels very much like how gig workers are managed by algorithms, constantly monitored via apps with precarious earnings. That algorithmic control, the lack of transparency, the constant surveillance, it mirrors the show's world. Workers treated as data points, and the power platforms have to deactivate workers is disturbingly similar to cyclists becoming lemons. The promise of flexibility often hides insecure, demanding work that blurs the lines, mostly benefiting the platform.
even online dissent itself?
Yeah, it's complicated. Social media is a tool for dissent, but its business model thrives on engagement. Outrageous, polarizing content often gets amplified by algorithms because it gets reactions. So political communication itself gets commodified. Dissent becomes content, potentially losing substance in the drive for viral spectacle. So that mirror effect we talked about. In all these examples, it's often the simulation of authenticity, the performance, that gets commodified. It's hyper-real. Wraith Abi is a hyper-real performer. Bing's packaged rage is hyper-real entertainment.
And we, the audience, aren't just watching this happen.
No, we're deeply involved. Building on older ideas like the audience commodity, our attention being sold, we're now active co-producers. Our clicks, likes, shares, comments, that's unpaid labor that builds the very brands and personas we consume. Influencers need that engagement. Brands leverage user content. It's a feedback loop. Our demand for performed authenticity fuels its production, just like the hotshot audience reinforces the system's values with their participation.
Wow. Okay, so we've journeyed from this piece of fiction through history and theory and found these really striking connections to our own world.
Yeah, 15 million merits works so well as an allegory because it distills these complex processes. We see the historical pattern of resistance being co-opted. We see how theories from the Frankfurt School, Debord, Baudrillard give us tools to understand it. And Bing's story is the core paradox, isn't it? He gets his voice heard, but only because the system figures out how to profit from it. His authentic rage is neutralized, turned into a show. He trades one prison for another, maybe a slightly more comfortable one, but still a prison defined by the system. It shows how hard genuine resistance is when the system is so good at absorbing critique.
It really makes you question our own agency, our ability to be truly authentic or critical.
It does. Is there still space for unmediated experience when everything is potentially subject to market logic, to the spectacle? And what's the psychological cost of living in this environment? The alienation, the cynicism, the challenge to critical thinking when even dissent can be just another form of entertainment. The show's forced viewing and surveillance feel very relevant to how digital media impacts us. And as we've seen, these aren't just future worries. Reality TV, influencers, woke washing, the gig economy, online discourse, these dynamics are here. And we have to remember our own role, our own labor in keeping this cycle going.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with some pretty challenging things to think about.
Definitely. Can real authenticity even exist outside this commodification logic anymore? And if it's getting harder, what kinds of dissent, if any, can't be so easily recuperated and sold back to us? We talk about media literacy, critical thinking, but can even those become just another skill set to be marketed? Maybe the most chilling thought is that the system, both in the show and maybe increasingly in our world, isn't naive. It understands authenticity and dissent. It understands them specifically so it can absorb them. Judge Hope knew exactly what she was doing with Bing. It wasn't an accident, it was a calculated move by a system that feeds on critique. When the critique itself becomes valuable content, finding a way to genuinely challenge things gets, well, really, really complicated.
There's a lot to chew on. Thank you for walking us through all of that.
It was fascinating to explore.
And thank you for joining this deep dive. Definitely keep pondering those questions.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.